An arrest isn't announced with sirens or cameras. It begins with an unnerving quiet. On the 10th of March, the official inquiry into Nancy Guthrie's vanishing act transformed from a public spectacle into a clandestine waiting game. In Pima County, the sheriff's refusal of elite search teams sent a chilling signal to insiders, those familiar with the inner workings of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This was not a sign of the investigation losing steam. Instead, it raised a more unsettling possibility that law enforcement was behaving as if they had already solved the puzzle. 40 days had elapsed since Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her residence. The first hours, spanning January 31st and February 1st, were marked by an overwhelming public display of state and federal power. By the 6th week, however, the public-facing image of the investigation had profoundly altered. The once bustling command posts had vanished. Broad public pleas for any information had been replaced by laser-focused, almost surgical inquiries. In any high-stakes abduction, a palpable tension emerges when the mission shifts from finding the victim to closing the case. Observable changes in the methodology of Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos and the FBI task force pointed to just such a transition. These were not random adjustments. They suggested a deliberate tightening of the investigative focus. The implication was clear. The target had been identified, and investigators were merely allowing the forensic evidence to set before making their move. The true significance of this pivot, however, is revealed in a single, startling communication that brought the law enforcement community to a standstill. Jennifer Coffindaffer, a former FBI special agent who had spent a career navigating the Bureau's complex machinery, analyzed the sheriff's recent actions and arrived at a stark, singular conclusion. Her assessment was not that the investigation was failing, it was that it was about to explode, and the fuse had been lit by an official rejection of help. The United Cajun Navy and EquiSearch are not collections of well-meaning volunteers. They are highly professional, non-profit entities with proven track records in difficult and complex recovery missions. The organization's vice president, Brian Thrasher, had presented a meticulously detailed 41-page operational blueprint to the Pima County Sheriff's Department. This was far from a simple offer of assistance. It proposed deploying thermal drones that could isolate heat signatures against the cold desert landscape after dark. The plan also included 25 highly trained canines and systematic grid searches managed by specialists with deep experience in that precise terrain. From Sheriff Chris Nanos, the response was a wall of silence. Eventually, under pressure, his office released a statement asserting that such work was better handled by professionals. For seasoned investigators, a sentence like that carries a dual meaning. The first is obvious: bureaucratic pride, a sheriff guarding his own territory. But the second interpretation is far more chilling. It suggests a calculated, tactical choice. When investigators are confident they know the location of key evidence, or when the physical search phase has been rendered obsolete, the presence of civilian searchers transitions from an asset to a potential liability. The only logical reason to reject such a plan is if the search itself is no longer necessary. The focus had shifted from the desert terrain to the sterile environment of the forensic lab. Jennifer Coffindaffer's interpretation of this rejection was direct. In her view, law enforcement was operating from a position of confidence. They were dismissing search specialists because they no longer needed to find Nancy. What they needed was to secure an arrest. Rejecting the search teams, however, was just the initial clue. While the case appeared to be losing momentum to the outside world, internally, the very framework of the investigation was undergoing a quiet and radical restructuring. The command center's relocation from Tucson to Phoenix led many to believe the FBI was scaling back. That assumption was incorrect. The most significant forensic development was not announced in a press conference. It was communicated by the quiet return of a vehicle to the Guthrie family. And the return of that specific vehicle, belonging to the victim's sister, Annie Guthrie, reveals a great deal about the state of the DNA evidence. This action served as a crucial investigative milestone. Early on, authorities had impounded several vehicles connected to the case. Releasing a central piece of evidence back into a family's possession typically means one of two things. Either it holds no forensic value, or, far more probable in an active, high-priority case, the Bureau has already meticulously harvested every microscopic piece of data it contains. The fingerprints are lifted, the DNA is cataloged, and the digital trail is mapped. The physical object is no longer required because the forensic portrait is already finished. This brings the analysis to a second indicator, a subtle but significant change in the language used by Sheriff Chris Nanos. In a recent interview with the national media, Nanos employed a term that intelligence experts deemed highly unusual. He claimed investigators were definitely closer to identifying the suspects from the surveillance video, not simply making progress, but definitely closer. Within the FBI's lexicon, the word closer is not a vague assurance. It has a precise clinical meaning. The pool of potential suspects is shrinking. For an intelligence analyst like Jennifer Daubler, who dedicated 13 years to data collection for the Bureau, it was a specific kind of language, one rarely deployed unless law enforcement is sending a deliberate signal to a suspect that the walls are closing in. When terms like definitely closer are paired with mentions of hot leads, the conversation has shifted far beyond sifting through public tips. This is the language of verification, of digital tracing, and forensic analysis focused on a very specific circle of individuals. The static had been filtered out. All that was left was the signal. This new intensity was mirrored in the very structure of the task force. While the overt, large-scale presence in Tucson appeared to have diminished, 4 Pima County detectives and 1 sergeant were now formally integrated into an FBI task force, operating full-time out of the Bureau's Tucson office. This wasn't a winding down of operations. It was the formation of a command center, a war room dedicated solely to the Guthrie case. It had become what experts classify as a red-hot investigation, one that was no longer searching for a suspect. They were now looking at him. For retired FBI agents, the recent return of investigators to Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood was a sign of extreme precision. They were no longer asking if anyone saw something, they were asking about specific seconds on specific clocks. Because even through the mask, the perpetrator had left behind 3 physical markers, almost impossible to conceal. And the most damning of them all was visible on his pinky finger. The physical portrait of the masked man on Nancy Guthrie's porch was proving to be far more detailed than the initial distorted footage suggested. Analysts who had put the doorbell video under a microscope, including Jennifer Coffindaffer, had isolated a collection of identifiable traits that law enforcement was actively tracking. First, there were the eyebrows. Even through the fabric of a ski mask, their shape, density, and arch were distinctive. Second, the mustache. The FBI confirmed that a dark mustache could be seen below the lower edge of the mask. Third, his gear, not only the backpack, but the precise placement of his holster and his general manner, which suggested a background in tactical training. But the fourth marker was the one that anchored the entire identification, a pinky ring. Sheriff Nanos himself confirmed the ring was visible on the suspect's smallest finger, seen even through thick, protective gloves. This was no generic detail. It was a personal item, a signature. Somewhere in the orbit of the suspect, there was a person, an ex-partner, a member of his family, a work colleague who would recognize that ring, that mustache, that specific method of carrying a weapon. This dynamic created what was being called the $122 million air fryer. That metaphor, from retired agent Maureen O'Connell, was meant to capture the immense pressure building on the conspirators. With $1.1 million from the Guthrie family, plus more from the FBI and private donors, the reward had become a sum that could rewrite a person's life. If more than one person was involved, and the intricacy of the abduction pointed to that conclusion, the pressure to be the first one to betray the others was becoming unbearable. Cases of this magnitude are seldom solved by a single, brilliant deduction. They are solved by betrayal. By a girlfriend who puts the pieces together and realizes the man she lives with matches the description of the eyebrows and the pinky ring. By a co-conspirator who calculates that $1.2 million is worth more than his allegiance to a kidnapper. The heat was being applied not only by the authorities but by the sheer, crushing weight of the money on the table. In a parallel track, the lead involving the Walmart backpack had entered a phase of massive data analysis. The Ozark Trail hiker pack, a 25-liter model, had a limited retail footprint. The FBI had pulled purchase records for every single unit sold across the region in the past several months. They were cross-referencing this data with credit card transactions, self-checkout, surveillance footage, and other digital footprints. If that bag was purchased from a store, the Bureau almost certainly already had a clear image of the buyer's unmasked face from another time and another camera. The legal strategy operating behind the investigation was now centered on the concept of retroactive significance. When agents circle back to a neighborhood weeks later, as they have in this case, It's a sign that the timeline has been sharpened to a fine point. Early on, a neighbor's anecdote about a suspicious vehicle might have been disregarded as meaningless noise. But after the cell phone records arrive, after the tower pings have been analyzed, and the Walmart purchase data offers confirmation, that insignificant observation from 3 weeks ago can suddenly become the vital missing link. The FBI was now pursuing 3 digital streams at once. Cell tower pings from the Catalina foothills on January 31st, geolocation logs from the weeks that led up to the abduction, especially around January 11th, when a suspicious man was spotted conducting surveillance, and retail transaction tracing. When all 3 of these streams converge on a single device or a single individual, the case moves from the realm of probable cause to that of an arrest warrant. This is a procedural pipeline. It cannot be rushed, but once the data begins to align, it is also unstoppable. The changes in the investigation's posture, the public refusal of more tips, the formal embedding of detectives, the return of evidence to the family, all of it signaled a case that was no longer in a phase of discovery. It had entered the prosecutorial phase. Sheriff Nanos had already admitted there was information that authorities possessed, but had not yet shared with the world. In an inquiry of this magnitude, the details investigators withhold from the public are almost always the very elements that will secure a conviction, not just an initial arrest. If the progression of the Nancy Guthrie case adheres to the pattern of recent high-profile federal successes, the investigation is entering its most decisive phase. One can draw a chilling parallel to the Brian Kohberger investigation in Idaho. There, a suspect operated under a profound sense of invisibility, moving with unshakable confidence for 5 weeks as a digital web was quietly woven around him. It was during that critical 5th and 6th week that DNA from a discarded cotton swab converged with cell tower data, and his illusion of impunity was shattered by a pre-dawn raid. We have now entered the 6th week of the Guthrie investigation. The measured confidence expressed by Jennifer Coffindaffer is not born from optimism. It comes from recognizing the unmistakable architecture of an investigation nearing its conclusion. Forensic labs are finalizing their analyses. The $1.22 million reward is a powerful motivator for potential informants, and the digital signature left by a 25-liter backpack and a pinky ring is leading to its inevitable endpoint. The next tangible development will likely manifest as a grand jury filing or a sudden, massive law enforcement mobilization at a site far from the Catalina foothills. The net is no longer being cast, it is being methodically drawn in. The suspect, whoever he may be, is navigating a reality that is constricting around him with every passing hour. He is viewing the same released images as the public, the eyebrows, the mustache, the ring, and is almost certainly tormented by the question of who else recognizes those features. The pressure on him is becoming immense. The next few days will prove if Sheriff Nanos' promise that they are definitely closer will become a stark reality. If you recognize that distinct gait, that tactical gear, or that pinky ring on an individual in your circle, the chance to claim the reward and ensure your own security is rapidly expiring. The investigation is no longer searching for a path, it is now following the one it has already uncovered. Gemini Danoi. This story is more than a chronicle of a disappearance. It is a profound testament to the relentless inevitability of justice. In a world where shadows feel deep enough to swallow the truth, we often forget that the law doesn't always arrive with a roar. Sometimes it moves with the chilling, surgical precision of a heartbeat in a silent room. The investigation into Nancy Guthrie reminds us of a universal lesson. No mask is thick enough to hide the soul, and no desert is vast enough to bury a secret forever. Every choice we make leaves a permanent fingerprint on the world. A distinct gait, a specific gear, or even a simple pinky ring, these are the microscopic whispers of a conscience caught in the light. This is a call to vigilance. True safety isn't found in silence. It's found in the courage to speak. When we pay attention to the small details in our own circles, we aren't just watching, we are protecting the sanctity of our community. To those who believe they are invisible, the digital web is already woven. To the rest of us, your voice is the final thread. Remember, the net isn't just being cast, it is being drawn in. The truth is not a path we find, it is the destination that eventually finds us.